What's up, you filthy fucks? I mean that in the most respectful and loving way possible, but let's be real, you are all heathen and you are in need of a great gaming sermon given by the one true prophet of the gaming gods. And the way that I spread the good news of the gaming gospel is I've been commanded by the gaming higods themselves, me, Moto, the Father, Kojima, the Son, and Carmack, the Holy Ghost, who appeared to me in vision, commanded me to create the one true gaming podcast simply by interviewing creative and interesting people about their favorite gaming memories growing up. I'm actually not doing that today. Today, we have our first return motherfucking guests. We have, drumroll, boom, Patrick motherfucking Hickey Jr. He's been on the podcast before. Google it. He's awesome. We went through all his favorite games growing up, but he also writes a bunch of books about games, researches a bunch of books about games, gets cool stories from developers about games that you've never heard of. He does voiceovers for games. He writes for video games. Homeboy is balls deep all the way in, dripping head to toe in gaming juices. He's been marinating his whole life, and he's an O motherfucking G. And I'm really happy that he came on the podcast again. He is very easy to talk to. I've been telling him he needs to do his own podcast, so please, I will put all the applicable links in the podcast description to his socials and his accounts. Spam him, DM him, send him dick pics, whatever you got to do. Get the motherfucker to do a podcast because he's dope, he's entertaining, and his brain is full of cool tidbits about video games. Anyway, I had a blast. We talk about his new book that just came out. I believe it's his fourth book in the series, The Minds Behind the Sports Games, and he goes through lots of popular and cult classic sports games through the ages and digs up cool stories about the development and finds the nitty gritty, the shit you ain't gonna find anywhere else. Check it out, Amazon, anywhere they sell books. He said they're everywhere. So just Patrick Hickey Jr., Minds Behind the Sports Games. I will put the links in the podcast description, or you could use this thing called Google and type his name in, or type in the Minds Behind the Sports Games. The reason I'm being a little bit grumpy is some motherfucker just commented on one of my videos, and it was me reacting to the new Cyberpunk 2077 trailer. And as you would expect, I lost my shit. I had a grand old time watching the new trailer, the new advertisement, and this asshole comments, "Where can I watch this without the dude screaming?" Well, you're on my page, bro. Like, that's what we do. You could just, I don't know, type in Cyberpunk trailer on fucking Google. Like, why are you asking me the question that you should be asking Google? My whole page, every fucking video is me screaming, saying stupid shit on top of gameplay footage. That's like buying a new fucking Dr. Dre album and being like, when is this dude gonna stop rapping? Why is he rapping? Why is he rhyming? Well, if you don't want Dr. Dre, go buy fucking Garth Brooks! Anyway, Patrick Hickey Jr. is the shit. He doesn't say dumb shit like that. He knows how to handle himself online. He's a very professional, moderate, college professor, all those things, but he can also hang and he can talk shop. Check him out. Buy his fucking books. They're dope. I say these things in the name of me, Moto, Father, Kojima, the Son, and Carmack, the Holy Ghost. Enjoy the show.
One of my favorite podcasters in the entire world. Killing it.
Blushing. Dude, you are my first repeat guest. You're the first one.
Wow. I feel special.
Yeah, you should feel special. For all 12 people that are going to listen to this.
We'll try and make it 13 this time.
Yeah, we're going to move it. We're going to bump it to 13 after this episode.
That's right.
So if you haven't listened, Patrick Hickey Jr., he was on the previous episode. I don't remember which episode. How about you give a spiel for yourself?
I think it was 50.
50?
I think so.
Who knows? Take a guess,
Yeah.
Shoot it, or you could just Google it, and I'm sure it'll come up.
Yeah.
Patrick Hickey Jr., Gaming Memories. It'll come up. But we went through all of your favorite games growing up. You gave give a quick little spiel about who you are and why we should give a shit about your opinion on games.
My name is Patrick Hickey Jr., and I am the author of the Minds Behind the Games book series. I'm also the assistant director of the journalism program at Kingsborough Community College. I am the chairman of the City University of New York Journalism Discipline Council. I don't know what that means, but it's awesome. I'm also a voice actor on several video games, including The Padre and The Padre One Shell Straight to Hell, Relentless Rex, The Caillou Offensive, and I am the writer on Croom, and a couple of other games that I can't announce yet because of NDAs. So yeah, I have over 3,000 games. My wife is kind of hot. No, she's definitely hot. So yeah. So yeah.
Well, your collection is pushing 3,000 right now?
It's over 3,000. Yeah.
You fit 3,000 items in that like little triangle Harry Potter room?
I have no room. Like, the only thing I have room for right now is, like, 3DS games. It's so bad. I don't even know how I continue to make room. It's bad. And I don't want to go digital. I really don't.
Yeah. I mean, look, I've gone digital, but I feel like it's sort of almost like I've caved to the dark side of the Force. Mm-hmm. Like, it's awesome. Don't get me wrong. But there's a part of me that knows part of my soul died when I made
I like touching stuff.
Yeah.
I like having the physical media.
Yeah, it's and it sounds like, so basically you've been a writer for a long time. It does seem like you're getting more involved, like with the video game voice acting, writing for video games. Do you see yourself like eventually transitioning to that kind of stuff full time and just ditching teaching?
It's funny because I was having a conversation with somebody today. I'm also doing voiceover for Tony Barnes' upcoming game, Run, Die, Run Again. Tony Barnes, if you guys don't know who he is, he's the he was the assistant producer on Desert Strike, Jungle Strike, Urban Strike,
Soviet
Buffy
Strike.
the Vampire, Soviet Strike, Nuclear Strike, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Star Wars Episode 3, Strider 2014, Medal of Honor 2010. I mean, he's a freaking legend, and I'm doing VO on his current game, and I was just telling him like how I want to do more in the video game industry. I want to do some writing. I mean, I'm the voice of a character in a game, like of a main character, like of a mascot game, which is awesome. And Padre 2 is going to be an awesome game. It's like a combination of like Smash TV with like tower defense elements. Like, I'm super happy with the way that game turned out. But I would be lying if I said I didn't want to do more. So at one hand, you have the minds behind the games. I'm preserving the history of all of these games, and I'm speaking to all of these developers and getting their stories. But at the same time, too, I want to create some of my own stories, too. So, yeah, I mean, that's something I would love to do full time. But being a college professor is a sweet gig, and I don't want to give that up either. So, yeah, it's hard. It's hard.
There's I just saw an article, I believe, on Kotaku about the girl. She's in what's that show? Have you seen Mythic Quest, by the way? The Apple TV original?
No. Is it good?
Dude, it's... I hate everything movies about video games, TV shows about video games. It's historically been pretty bad. I thought the Pokemon one, the most recent one, was actually pretty decent for a Pokemon movie. What was it called? Pokemon.
Oh, I saw some of that. I saw like the first 5 minutes of that.
It's got Ryan Reynolds in it, whatever one that is.
Oh, you mean Detective Pikachu? Yeah, Detective Pikachu was gangsta.
I thought it was good. I thought it was like, what? It's pretty good.
I almost cried a little bit at the end.
Yeah, that was good.
Damn.
But Mythic Quest is the guy from It's Always Sunny of Philadelphia, Charlie. I don't know what his real name is. It's his new show, but it's set in a fictional game development studio that's like hinted very strongly that it's owned by Ubisoft, because it's like there's a line in there that's like, I'm actually not in charge. It's a corporate conglomerate based in Montreal calls the shots. They don't say Ubisoft like perfect, yeah. but all the game they have, like they're making this fake game called Mythic Quest, which is like it's a riff on World of Warcraft basically. And it's making all this money. It's huge. And they show clips from like For Honor and Assassin's Creed, but making it sound like it's supposed to be footage of this game, Mythic Quest.
Gotcha.
Ubisoft is somehow like allowing, some deal went down. But anyway, it's actually a really good show. And I don't know why was I bringing up Mythic Quest in the first place? I'm already distracted. It doesn't matter. Oh, voiceover. The girl.
Yes.
There's a girl, it's the girl from Hey Ask What You Playing. Did you remember that old YouTube series?
Wow, yeah.
She
That's a throwback.
That series was funny as hell.
Yeah.
She wrote a bunch of shit for Borderlands 2, and I think she was Tiny Tina, wasn't she, the voice?
Wow, yeah.
Maybe.
Wow.
May or may not.
Yeah, I think so.
But anyway, she's a voice actor now, and she's a writer, and there's a whole article was about how she broke into the video games industry doing exactly what you're doing, voice acting and writing. Those are the two things that she does. And now she's full-time and works on a bunch of games and all that.
That would be a dream. That would be a dream. Soon. I mean, I'm just going to keep cracking at it. It's like I try and do a couple of things every day to get myself a little bit closer. Like today, I was editing photos for the PlayStation book, and then Mike Froggett, the programmer for C12, The Final Resistance on PS1, he sent me some answers, and we were talking a little bit. So it's like every day, just a little bit more in a positive direction, because it's like if you just do like a half hour a day of something productive, Monday and Tuesday you feel like you've done nothing, but like by Friday or Saturday, you've got like 5 or 6 hours of work under your belt. You know, so that's what I do.
Actually, that's called I've heard some people call it the compound effect, which is my buddy he's here in the studio, Tom Servo, Omar Presswich. He's been on the podcast. He's the social media manager for K-Swiss, does all the social media. He's in town just hanging out. He taught me that. For life. I always clown him because when I grew up, K-Swiss shoes weren't cool, but apparently they're cool now, and I'm not hip.
Yeah, they're comfortable as hell too.
Yeah, yeah, that's what. Apparently, in the East Coasters, all you assholes like K-Swiss.
When my feet were small, I used to rock them back in the day. My feet are too big now, so need to make them in like a 15 and a half, and I'll rock them.
He taught me about the compound effect, which is like the idea is that you overestimate what you can do in a day, but you underestimate what you can do in a year.
Yep.
And I just from like when I started the podcast and you came on super early and me just basically stalking you, being in a little group and seeing, I'm like, if you keep doing what you're going to do, like eventually it's going to get somewhere.
Absolutely.
The only question is how far. Some people get really good breaks or have good connections, so that process gets amplified a little bit. But I also know a bunch of people in the music industry where I did that for like 10 years and phased my way out. But I know guys that stuck with it and they all got somewhere as long as they stuck with it.
Yep. That's how writing is too. I mean, I know so many journalists that frankly aren't very good, but they never gave up and they're still in it. And it's called, some people call it failing forward. You know, you just stick in it and people give you opportunities based on how long you've been there and things like that. I see it a lot in education. People teaching classes that they have no business teaching, that they have no experience in, but they've been there for so long and they're rank and they've gotten promotions, and it's just like, yeah, so what? So,
what's interesting about that is even so, I was implying that if you stick with it, and I was in my mind, I would have thought like that includes learning from your mistakes and getting better over time.
Oh yeah, but some people don't.
Some people don't, and it still works. And it still works.
But it still works. Yep.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So whatever you're into, whatever you're trying to accomplish, that should be even more motivation to stick with it. Because in a lot of times, if you stick with it and you don't even get better, that can still get you somewhere. Now, if you stick with it, most people are naturally going to get better. That's the point. Absolutely.
I think that if there's no growth in what you're doing, then it's like, what's even the purpose? You know, like that's for me. At times, like I tell people that they're like, oh, which book should I buy? And I'm like, oh, buy the newest one. And they're like, why? And I'm like, because it's the best one. Because I just feel like I'm getting better at this. And I love the first book, but at the same time too, I know that the reporting and the writing is better in the last one, because I mean, one of my mentors as a journalist, her name's Eleanor Bader. She's tough as nails. She don't take no crap from anybody. And if you ask her, like, what's the best article you've ever written? And she'll go, the last one. And I'm just like, I love you. Like, you are just, that's the exact mentality that I always want to have. So,
yeah. Speaking of books, that's why we're having you on. Your newest one is the sports games book, right? Minds Behind the Sports Games.
The Minds Behind the Sports Games.
The Mind Behind the Sports Game. Is that your like official brand voice?
Yes, the Minds Behind the Sports Games. I'm here with Cade Call, and we're calling Game 7 of the Minds Behind the Sports Games. Oh my god, terrible. But
that reminded me of, I don't know why that reminded me of Sandlot. I don't think there's an announcer in the movie Sandlot, but it made me think of the movie Sandlot.
Well, doesn't the catcher, remember? Like the catcher like calls the game when he's talking crap behind everybody's back and stuff like that. Do you remember that part? When they're playing the rich kids?
Yes, I do remember that. Maybe that's what was,
Ham, I love that guy.
Minds Behind the Sports Games. It just came out. You can get it everywhere, right? Amazon, your website.
Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Indigo, wherever fine books are sold. Digitally, it's available digitally. So, Yeah, it's available everywhere, so it's pretty cool.
And the spiel, or I guess what Patrick does is he does the hard work of reaching out, which I've tried this, by the way, to get guests on the podcast, and it's hard as fuck. So I know what he's going through. He reaches out, he tracks people down that have developed games, and he gets a hold of people that are going to, like, he gets like real underground shit that hasn't been on Wikipedia or Kotaku or IGN, interviews and gets cool stories about games, both super popular games and then cult games that are really like deep cuts for video game heads. Now, sports games, I mentioned before giving the podcast, I don't know that much about sports games, but I think I might be able to stump you because I looked up a cool fact today. I probably won't because you're like a real G, more so than me, which is weird because everyone knows me as the crazy video game guy. And I'm like, you fuckers don't even know how deep some of these fools go. I'm like swimming in the 3-foot pool. This guy's out there swimming in the ocean. Okay, so I was going to talk about, my guess was the first sports game probably was Pong because Pong is kind of like table tennis. And I'm like, that'd be my guess. And I looked it up and I was wrong. So can you tell me what the first sports game was? Because it's not Pong.
No, I can't. No. Wow.
Yes. Ha! Well, I literally learned this morning in preparation for the podcast, so it's not like I actually knew.
Yeah, what was it?
There's a game called I got to get out of my because I looked up AWE wrestling when you told me that shit. Oh, it's called Tennis for Two, and this dude made it on like an oscillator in the 40s. Like
wow.
And it's basically Pong. Look it up.
Are they considered that a video game?
Okay, I'll find this is the Wikipedia, which I know you hate, but this is what Wikipedia says. It's a sports video game which simulates a game of tennis. Is one of the first games developed in the early history of video games. American physicist William Higginbottom designed the game in 1958 for the display at the Brookhaven National Laboratories annual public blah blah blah. So it was made on like this it looks like, I don't know, like Fallout type. It looks like a Pip-Boy on Fallout.
It looks like a Pip-Boy.
Yeah, that's what it looks like. I didn't know that till today. I thought it would have been Pong.
Wow, that's crazy.
And you could argue that's not really a video game.
That's the thing, too. Like, I try and explain to people, like, because everyone always assumes that I've played every single video game in, like, the creation of video games, and it's like every day I find out games that I didn't even know existed. Oh, you know, and that it's like, as a journalist, I think the thing that separates me from, you know, some of these influencers and some of these podcasters and stuff like that not podcasters, streamers, is that they assume that they know. Okay. Sorry, my wife was talking to me. That they know everything about video games, but it's like I know a lot about the games that I've written about because I've researched them and interviewed the developer. But there's a lot that I don't know. But that's my favorite part of doing this is that every day I can find out things that I didn't know about. So now I'm totally gonna look that up later. And I mean that developer has probably passed away.
Probably, but there might be someone around that was alive.
Yeah, absolutely. So
yeah, I guess it would have been Pong, but it's not. I'll get. Depending on how you define video games. What's the earliest game you have covered in the book? The oldest game in the Minds Behind the Sports Games?
In the Minds Behind the Sports Games, probably Earl Weaver Baseball.
Earl Weaver Baseball? I've never even heard of that.
Or the original RBI Baseball.
Oh, RBI Baseball. I know that one.
So hold on, I'm going to pull up a list of the games because that would probably be the easiest way. But 720 is older than that. Cyber Bowl is after 720. So right now, that's a great question. I would say I probably go back as far as like the early 80s. Like pretty much all of the sports games here are like early arcade games or like Genesis or like founding fathers of like, so perfect example, I reviewed, you hear me? I interviewed the developers of the first Madden, of like MLB Slugfest, of Tony Hawk 3, of the first NHL 2K, Transworld Surf. So like kind of like the main, like the key games in each of these great franchises. So I don't go as far back.
What year did the first Madden come out?
I'm pretty sure it was 91.
And was that for Super
Genesis?
Genesis?
90, 91. But it was actually, it's the best chapter in the sports book. It was actually a failed PC game. And what happened was the Madden that we know on the Genesis and the Super Nintendo was actually like Electronic Arts arcade football. And what happened was Madden on the PC was such a colossal disappointment that at one point, John Madden called it an abortion. And and it was just like a really crappy, poor frame rate football game that was created by this man, Robin Antonick, and Electronic Arts founder, Trip Hawkins. And what happened was they didn't make any money on it, and it was hurting EA's bottom line big time. So when EA saw that they had this really cool overhead football game, they were like, what if we rebrand this John Madden Football, and we asked John Madden to take a lower royalty rate on this game, then maybe we can get into the black. And Madden agreed because he saw how much cooler, the Genesis version was.
This is way better. Yeah.
Yeah, and the rest is history. So the Madden that most people have played is not really a Madden game at all. It's pretty cool.
And I know Madden is the big juggernaut for like really the only juggernaut for football games, modern. But when it first came out, since I wasn't familiar with sports games growing, I didn't pay attention to other than Mutant League Football, which we talked about on our last podcast. That shit was awesome.
And Mutant League Hockey is in the sports book. So
nice. Was Madden out of the gate like a big success and sort of a behemoth, or did it slowly build into that? I'm pretty sure
the original Madden sold like 300,000 copies on the Genesis, which means it was a hardcore hit, because this is the thing, in order for a game to be considered a hit, like a massive hit, it needs like a 10% market share. So meaning like figure if they sold like 15 million units of a system and a game sold over 1.5 million copies, then it's like a bona fide hit. That means 10% of every person that owns a system owns it. So I mean, at the time of like 1990, I doubt there was more than 1 million people that had a Genesis in 1990, 1991, and 350,000 people had Madden. So like a third of every Genesis owners had Madden. So it was a runaway hit.
And has Madden? I haven't followed Madden at all. Again, has it been? Has there ever been like a legit competitor to Madden?
Oh, absolutely. NFL Game Day on the PlayStation.
Game Day, I do remember that.
Like Game Day 97. Game Day 98, those games blew Madden away in terms of playability, and they were a lot more fun. Yeah, Madden had a really hard time. I'd like to say EA in general had a really hard time adjusting from the Super Nintendo and Genesis era to the PlayStation. It wasn't until like NHL 98 and like Madden 98 and like NBA Live 98 that they really got on board and started making the top-notch, sports games again. So it took them a little while to get back in the swing of things. It's like a lot of people don't know this, but like NHL 96 was canceled on the PlayStation because it didn't meet EA's standards, and that was one of the reasons why like the NHL Face-Off series became such a fixture on the PlayStation, because that first year of the PlayStation, NHL Face-Off was the only hockey game, and luckily for Sony, it was a great hockey game, so that kind of like built that legacy.
What happened to Game Day? Why did it phase out? Do you know?
You know what happened? The same thing that happened to Madden and from the transition from Genesis to PS1 is exactly what happened to Game Day and Face Off and Game Breaker and NBA Shootout. They were great games on the PS1, but they weren't on top of things for the PS2. They weren't the same games. The graphics didn't improve the way people had liked, and they just grew out of favor. And the thing is too, the show, like MLB The Show, has such staying power that like from PS3 to PS4, it's just always been head and shoulders above. For like Game Day, Face Off, all of those other games, they were always in competition with EA, and I think people respected the EA brand a lot more than Sony Sports back then, so it was always harder for Sony to sell their sports games. And then by the time PS2 came, EA was just in a league of their own. And then at the same time too, you had EA, but then you also had 2K, because the NHL 2K games and the NFL 2K games were great. So Madden had competition from Game Day. Then you also had the Blitz games, because all of a sudden now Midway wasn't making arcade games anymore, so Blitz 2002, Blitz 2003, those were all home console exclusive. So there was more competition than ever on the PS3, and Sony was not ready, to handle itself amongst all that competition. So you had a couple of other publishers really succeed, but Electronic Arts was the one that ended up on top out of all of that.
Yeah, it made me think of, so the three biggest sports games I hear people talking, like it's usually like guys who aren't gamers. They don't know anything about games, but they have a sports game they love, and they own a PS4 for that game. And and there's three, like this type of person, I meet them all the time. Dudes I hang out with, like they're not into games at all, but I play 2K. And when they say 2K, they usually mean NBA 2K.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So how did
Absolutely.
So like the 2K brand dominated basketball, but they lost the football? Sounds like.
See, and the thing is, the sad part is they lost football because they lost the license because Electronic Arts got the license to the NFL.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so like the NFL 2K games were just as good as Madden, and the last football game that 2K put out was All Pro Football 2K8, and that doesn't have an NFL license. So that has all like retired players, and you can make your own team based out of like all Hall of Fame players and stuff like that. And it's a great game, but it doesn't have an NFL license. So yeah, the only reason why 2K got out of the football business is because they didn't have a license. So. And
does EA have there's no competitor for 2K in basketball, right? There's no EA.
Well, no. NBA Live is NBA Live is still coming out, but they had a couple of years where they took off, and a couple of their games weren't very good because they had short development times. But I have to say, man, like right now, the NBA Live series, the last couple of years that it came out, was actually pretty solid. If there wasn't like a 2K, I think plenty of people would play NBA Live. But see, the same thing that EA did to other companies by having their brand power be so strong and that hurting better games, that's what 2K does now with basketball. So it's like if 2K comes out with a basketball game and it's crap, people will still buy it because they expect, the 2K games to be better than EA.
If that's like the big brand, that's where everyone's going to be playing. That's where all the action's going to be at.
Yep, it's crazy.
The other big franchise I see people owning a console for, even though they don't play games, is FIFA. But I do remember, is it PES, the Konami brand, being pretty competitive like earlier on? I don't know what happened to it now.
It's still around, and it has like a super hardcore niche audience, and it still sells well. It still sells in the six figures. But FIFA is probably one of like the top 3 best-selling sports franchises ever.
Yeah.
It might even be like in the top 5 video game franchises of all time. And that's the thing too. When I started working on the sports book, I'm like, I have to get FIFA. And luckily for me, I spoke to Jules Burt, who was one of the producers on the original NBA Shootout on PlayStation, and he is actually the man who co-designed the prototype for the original FIFA. So that's a chapter in the minds behind the sports games. You can find out all about how FIFA was actually born. It's really freaking cool.
That's a good selling point. I mean, yeah, that is one of the biggest franchises of all time. I can't think of a bigger sports franchise than FIFA.
Yeah, absolutely. When you think of like in the United States, soccer isn't like that huge of a thing, compared to like the NFL and the MLB and things like that. But the worldwide appeal of soccer is ridiculous.
It's insane. Yeah, it's insane. What's the first sports game you played that you got into?
Probably RBI Baseball.
Baseball.
Or ice hockey on the NES. Those 2 games were probably like my go-to.
I do remember playing RBI Baseball on the NES at a friend's house and liking it. And I remember thinking when you were in the batting view, the graphics were like really cool because the sprites were pretty big, like bigger than your average NES game. I'm trying to pull up some footage, but I'm ads, man. I'm so...
No, it's okay. The thing that I really liked about RBI Baseball was it had real players in it. And for me, as a little kid, being like a stats junkie, being able to play like with the Mets and seeing like Keith Hernandez's batting average and home runs and RBIs and stuff, that was just, for me, that just took the fun to like a completely other level, because there was other sports games out there that didn't have real players, and it was fun, and I like to play games with my dad and stuff, but then to be able to like hit a home run with like Don Mattingly or George Brett or like these players that I grew up watching and idolizing, that like made the game mean that much more to me.
Yeah. So I didn't even know that. I mean, I think I do remember being aware of who Jose Canseco was, and he was in the game, I believe, like recognizing that name, but it didn't dawn on me that would have been a sort of groundbreaking feature for an early sports game. Oh, this has like actual real athletes in it.
Yeah, it had actual real players. It had a Major League Baseball Players Association license, because like what would happen is developers before then, they would use the same stats as the players, but use different names and like change the numbers and stuff. So if you were smart and you really knew the sport, you could guess who was who, but they weren't allowed to like use the players' names. And like EA later would just use the number of the player and then like have the rating be based on the actual player. So pretty crazy stuff that they used to have to do back then.
It's almost like, it's kind of, I mean, the way GTA does it now with like cars is way more tongue-in-cheek and obvious. Like the name, instead of being the Bronco, it'll be like the Tonko or something like that. You know what I mean? It's like, that's kind of like an earlier version of that. That makes sense, where you can't come right out and say what it is, but if you're paying attention, you know what it is.
Absolutely. It's like to the point where, like, I'll tell you like a funny story. For the first Madden, there was a cornerback for the San Francisco Giants. His name was Eric Davis, and he's a good football player. But his rookie year, he wasn't that great. He like kind of grew into a pretty good, defensive back. But what happened was his wife called up Electronic Arts and is like, I know that's my husband. Why is his rating so low? Blah, blah, blah. So like the players like really cared about their ratings, and then like NHL took it like a step further because they had the players' names and they had a book. Like when you bought the game, the instruction manual had the rosters for all the teams and all the players, and it had their rating next to it. So like there's a player on the Tampa Bay Lightning, Sean Chambers, that on a scale from 1 to 100 is a 1, and Ken Baumgartner is a 4 out of 100, and Ken Baumgartner is like 6'4", like 230 pounds, and he's like a scary son of a bitch. So he was actually a member of like the NHL Players Association, and he approached one of the EA developers at the time of the development, and he's like, why am I a 3? I mean, why am I a 4 out of 100 in the game? Like, what is that? And the developer had to actually explain and be like, listen, your stats, we ran the numbers, and you're a 4 out of 100. So it was a different time in video game history.
Damn, that's awesome. Imagine being that dude. So who's gonna tell him that he actually sucks? I'm not gonna do it. One of you guys gotta do it.
Yeah, it was Michael Brook that had to tell him. He was the producer on NHLPA 93, and he also was on NHL 94, NHL 95, like one of the founding fathers of Electronic Arts. And he worked on Earl Weaver Baseball. He worked on Madden. He ended up leaving EA and working at Sega, producing games for Sega. So he did like NFL 95, NFL 98, NBA Action 95. Like the guy has an impressive resume, but he had a pair of balls back then, man, to say that. And late 20s, telling crazy hockey players that, yeah, sorry, bro, we had to rate you like a 4 out of 100. It's nuts.
It just made me realize. It just made me think of, you're a voice actor. I'm gonna put you on the spot. Give me your best EA Sports, it's in the game impression.
EA Sports, it's in the game. Tried to do it like the chipset way, EA Sports, it's in the game.
That'll be the highlight for the Instagram post.
Nice.
That made me think of like, oh, that was, I didn't even play sports games, but that little intro, I was aware of it, and it's iconic, even to me.
One of the stories I tell in the book too is, not a lot of people know this, but before EA Sports, there was the Electronic Arts Sports Network, EASN. And what happened was the logo looked similar to ESPN, and ESPN ended up suing them.
What?
And they had to change the name to EA Sports.
So this, I didn't even know that. This is like super early before EA Sports.
Yeah. And this is before EASN. They wanted to call it Electronic Arts Legends, and they wanted to have like all of these games like with like legendary athletes like Earl Weaver Baseball and Dr. J and Jordan versus Bird and stuff like that. But then they kind of changed course. Electronic Arts didn't want to.
There's a Jordan versus Bird video game?
Yes. There's a Dr. J versus Bird game. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was one-on-one Dr. J versus Larry Bird. Yeah, man. And these games look like crap compared to games of today, but these were excellent sports games that had tons of stats, tons of depth for an early sports game. They kept track of the shots you made, the shots you missed, and like the algorithms were rocking. Like these guys were rock stars that were making these games for EA. They set the tone for a lot of the games that we have today. Without these games, you would not have the games that we have today.
What happened to Tecmo Super Bowl? Because that was like the juggernaut before Madden.
What I think happened was EA came up with this idea that what we're going to do is we're going to put out a new sports game every year.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And the thing is, that put a lot of these developers under a ton of pressure. So a lot of people don't know this, but there's a very big chance with sports games today that like the same team that worked on NBA Live 20 isn't going to be the same team to work on NBA Live 21. It's going to have different people on it. There's going to be a huge turnover and stuff like that. But there's like 200 people on that team now. Back in the day, in 1992, 1993, it would take these guys 9 months to make a game, and it would only be 5 or 6 of them. And what they would do is they would be super burnt out by the time it was finished, and as soon as the game was done, they had to start the next one. Or the whole team got shifted out and a new team came in. So it's like, perfect example, NBA Action 94 was developed by Malibu Malibu Interactive. NBA Action 95 was developed by Park Place. Two different development teams, but Sega published both of those games. So to the average gamer, they just think it's a continuation of the series, when in reality, the only thing that those games have in common is the name. It's two completely different basketball games developed by two completely different teams. So EA really changed the dichotomy of video games in the fact that they were like, you know what, this is what we're going to do. We're going to release a new sports game every year to reflect that season, and we're going to have new features in the games and da-da-da-da. Because, like, think about it. Tecmo, you have Tecmo Bowl and you have Tecmo Super Bowl. And those games are, like, a couple of years apart because it took that long to make a game. And EA was like, nah, we can make a ton of money. Like, we're talking 1986, 1987, 1988, like Earl Weaver Baseball, you could actually create players, create stadiums. They had download discs that you could download and update rosters. You could create players. You could do all of these things in the 80s on a PC. You could mod the hell out of the game. You know, EA was totally ahead of the curve. Like, so many people shit on EA now, but man, like, without what these guys did, the video game industry would be markedly different. Like, if you look at the features of a game like Earl Weaver Baseball, every baseball game after that one takes all of those features and makes them like a key component of their game. So crazy stuff.
It kind of seems like the pattern, not just with game developers, but businesses in general, is you have some sort of trailblazer, like you say with Earl Weaver Baseball. They trailblazed a bunch of stuff that every baseball game had after. And someone who consistently trailblazes, maybe like Apple, eventually that trailblazing is going to give them success. That success is going to create size, and then eventually it's almost like every business inevitably morphs into like the evil corporate conglomerate. It's like this, it's just like the pattern of life almost. It's weird.
Absolutely. And you know what it is too? It's like, I hate when people are like, all these AAA developers. And it's like, you know what it is? All of these AAA developers started off as small indies, you know, Activision, EA, Ubisoft. I mean, they all started off as small little companies. So the thing is, you can't shit on them because they did good business.
Yes.
Like, I hate when people are like, oh, EA sucks. Oh, all the microtransactions and bee-ba-da-ba-ba-da-boo-ba-da-ba-da-ba. It's like, listen, if you don't like microtransactions, then don't pay. Don't pay. Don't play to pay. Don't pay to play. And they'll stop doing it.
I got sucked into one, though. I gave in. They got me. Ubisoft got me with Assassin's Creed, the Egyptian Origins. Because the grinding was like, it took so much time. And I'm like, I'm an adult and I want to see this cool shit and I want to beat the game. I'm just going to buy one of those experience packs. I ended up spending like $80. The only time I've ever spent anything on any sort of extra. And I felt so taken advantage of and dirty that I've never done it since. But you're right. The rest of my, I don't. You don't have to spend that money. You don't have to.
It's just, my nephew, I have two nephews, one's 17 and one is 11, and they buy DLC all the time, which DLC is fine, but like they buy stuff with Fortnite. Oh, the skins pack, the this, that. I'm like, if you just play the game, you know, and what happens is they spend all this money playing the game and they think that they're good. And I'm like, you just spent more money than me. You're not better than me. So it's sad in a way how things used to be. I used to have so much respect for like the kid that would be able to get like all of his Pokemon on like level 100 and max out their stats and blah, blah, blah. And now it's just like, now you could just cheat and do whatever the hell it is that you want to do, you know? So it's a different time. I feel so old right now just talking like this, but
yeah, I mean, it is interesting, like these big publishers, which we brought up Ubisoft and we were talking about Assassin's Creed. Ubisoft is one that like they gained more steam after I was a little bit older, so I feel that I have a little bit more of a reference point of how Ubisoft went from like during the Splinter Cell days, I didn't view them as this evil corporate conglomerate. They were just a badass game company that put out badass shit.
Absolutely. And like for me before that, like on the PlayStation, like with Rayman, they just made really pretty games and beautiful worlds. And like when we got to Splinter Cell, it's just like they had this really cool sense of atmosphere. Like whatever game they made looked good, sounded good, had its own unique sense of style, and just felt good, you know? So yeah,
and like I've seen them. Rayman is actually one of the early PS1 games. I had a neighbor, bless his heart, that was like like 10 years older than me, and I would come over as a little annoying ass teenager. Can I borrow your Rayman? Can I? He had Rayman. Yeah. He had Raiden, like the
so
top down shump. Like
Raiden's so
Raiden,
good.
Yeah, Raiden.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
He had Raiden.
Raiden's great.
He had WWE WrestleMania, some sort of wrestling game, Jumping Flash, Battle Arena
Jumping
Toshinden.
Flash.
Anyway, yeah, Rayman. And I remember, like, that's a good point you brought up. Like, back then, Ubisoft to me was this, like, outlier. Like, Rayman was unlike anything.
Yep.
It's crazy. Do you remember Gex?
Yep.
The 2D Gex?
Oh, well, see, that's the thing. In the minds behind the PlayStation books, which is going to be my 6th book that I'm currently working on, I got Gex Enter the Gecko. So I'm going to be talking to one of the developers on that game. Gex was so good.
Is that before he went 3D? I don't remember the subtitle.
No. Yeah, this was the 3D one. This was the 3D one. But yeah, I love the original Gex is my favorite one too. The side scroller.
Well, I didn't play the Enter the Gecko. It was on 64 as well, right? I believe. I remember.
Yeah.
I played the side scroller, the original one, and what I liked about Gex, and I'm sure they carried this on with Enter the Gecko, was like the pop culture references. Everything was like pop culture, movies, music, and he was like this wisecracking kind of, for me as a teenager, like a little crass, a little edgy, talking shit.
It always felt like an episode of like Mystery Science Theater 3000 had sex with like Conker, you know? Like
Great
that's what it just felt like to me. You know? It was just so cool and so different. Oh, so that's the thing. We're talking about the sports game, but like I'm working on the minds behind the Genesis and the minds behind the PlayStation books now too. So it's just like, feel free. Like, I love all these references. That's why I'm doing all of these books, because we have all of these memories with all of these games. And like, I feel like so many of the behind the scenes stories have never been told. And I feel like it connects us that much more with those games, you know? So that's like with Gex, I'm still waiting on the answers for that chapter, but it's like, I cannot wait, because what I'll do is I'll get the answers and then I'll play through the game again. And I get such like this like feeling of gratitude, getting to understand why the game plays the way that it does. It's just awesome.
Dude, that brings up a good question. What's your process? It sounds like you obviously have played a game or you're aware of a game. You reach out, you know, you had a certain percentage agree to talk to you. You send some questions. Do you have like kind of like a set template that you augment? You get questions back and then you play it to sort of prep writing for the chapter? Yeah,
it's a little bit of both. It's like, it depends on the game. Sometimes there's like super rare games that like I know very little about. Like, I'll give you an example. I interviewed Tony Warner a couple of weeks ago, and he did this game on PS1 that I absolutely love called In Cold Blood. But it's like, I didn't know a lot about it. Like, I've played it, I finished it, and it was just this really cool and different like spy espionage game. But I had to just go very basic, like with the questions, like how was this game born? How were you involved? Just to kind of like fill in the blanks, just to kind of get an idea of where it was at so I could fill in the blanks. But then there's some other games where there's just so much information, so you can kind of hone in on specific things. But I mean, my style is basically like research as much as I possibly can about the game. Make sure that the game has some type of like following. Make sure that like people care about it. That's why I love Instagram. Instagram is such a good barometer. You know, you do hashtag searches and then you start finding games popping up a lot that people care about. Like, I mean, we've talked about this before on Instagram with LSD. Yeah. So not the drug, but the game. That so many people, I wouldn't know, but a lot of people care about that game, you know, and I was lucky enough to get an interview with the developer. But I mean, truth be told, I didn't get the answers that I was looking for, and I think my readers deserve better than what was given to me. So it's not going to be in the PlayStation book, but I could say that I at least got to that developer. So many people have tried to speak to that man for super long.
Was there anything that like you can say that you're going to cut anything noteworthy that he said?
No,
that is a weird
nothing.
Cult classic game.
Yeah, it is. It's super weird and super cult, and it was just basically like he was admitting the fact that he's never been like a video game guy, and that you know, it was like kind of like a way to augment like some of the things that he had done in music, and it was like, you know, what are some lessons learned? And the answer, none. How would you like the game to be remembered? No way. And I'm just like, yeah, I can't work like this. So, I mean, that happens sometimes, you know? So I emailed him back and I was like, listen, people care about this game. And I would, if I have to call you up on the phone, if I send you more questions, like if you want to Zoom, like I would just love to like pick your brain a little bit closer and get a little bit more. And he never answered me back. So could he answer me back still? Possibly. Maybe. Stranger things have happened before. But I mean, I try a lot more than some other journalists. And I mean, there are books books out there with disclaimers in their intro that say, oh, some of the events in this book don't happen the way that they did in real life, and they've been changed for dramatic effect. And then you have other video game books out there that use anonymous sources, which I think is bullshit, that I'll never do. So in that case, I could have, if I was embellishing or using anonymous sources, I could totally write a 3,000 word chapter on LSD. But I feel like video game players and fans and historians deserve better than that. And I myself will never do that. So because of that, LSD is not going to be in a book that I do anytime soon.
What's interesting about that is like how ironic, because that game over the years has spawned like almost a little conspiracy theory bubble.
Yep.
And it might have just turned out it was a dude that wasn't into gaming and made this weird experiments and doesn't give a shit about it. And there's nothing special behind the game.
That's pretty much the story, you know. But the thing is, it's like I can't. That's like barely even like a blog post. Like I could totally write an article based on my experiences and the emails back and forth with him and what I think of the game and what's been written of the game before. But again, like all of that stuff's been told before, and it's like I feel like it's my job doing these books to tell the stories that haven't been told or to provide more context on the stories that have been told already. That one hurt. You know, like when he answered me, I'm like, yes, and then I opened the email and I'm like, man. I can't use these, you know, so, and it's hard. I mean, I am the first one to admit I am a huge pain in the ass when it comes to doing this. Emails back and forth, like some of these developers, I feel so bad for them because I mean, I'm sending them, you know, we're going back and forth like 50, 60 emails back and forth, you know, or 2 or 3 Zoom calls or, you know, this and that, the other thing. But I always send them the chapter beforehand. I make sure that they're quoted the way that they want to be because, I mean, my books are in tons of libraries now all over the world. And I want these books to kind of stand the test of time. And I want these developers to understand that their stories matter and that they have a say. So I don't think that there's been a developer that I've worked with yet that hasn't like understood by the end like what I was trying to do, and they're all appreciative of it. But I mean, some of them that don't know who I am and don't know what I do, they're just kind of like, oh, I'll just copy and paste a couple of bullshit answers together, and then I have to kind of like tell them like I'm trying to do a little bit more, like help me out here. So it's difficult sometimes, but I would say for the most part, the developers are amazing to work with.
Dude, that's why I don't get it, man. I mean, I told you this last time. You're so goddamn good at talking. Like, I don't think you've said or stumbled over your words once yet, which is a little weird. Are you even human? 2, if you could get them to agree to be on a podcast, you could press them and get it out of them. Maybe like I told you last time. I don't know why you're not doing a podcast version.
I don't know. You know what it is? Because it's just I'm a writer.
I know you got this romantic thing about like
I do. I have this like uber like writing to me is like Terry Hatcher and like podcasting is like Sally Field like in Spider-Man 2. You know, like once upon a time maybe. You know, and I love to. You know, the reason why I can speak well is because I'm a college professor. You know, and that's what I do. I lecture for hours a day. But I don't know. I feel like I've had people tell me all the time, "Oh, you're so motivational. You're such an eloquent speaker," and I'm just like, I don't feel it. I feel like my writing comes across more my natural voice. I don't know. Maybe one day I'll podcast.
Maybe as like just like a supplement to promote your books, like do a podcast episode or something.
Maybe
just try it, bro.
We'll see.
Just try it.
I should.
You know what I want to do? I had this idea. I started this video and made me think of you because you're like actually voice actor. Do you remember the old PC game Zilliard?
Oh my god, that's a throwback.
Super throwback. I don't know. I didn't remember this until I was going to do a video on it. I'm like, I forgot this game because there's a game called Chasm, an indie game that came out a few years ago that is very similar to Zilliard. It made me think of Zilliard. I went back and found it that it has this like legit 28-minute intro of like anime slides, and I started doing a video of like voice acting of the intro, and then it was like really cheesy. That one I scrapped it because it was terrible. But I thought I thought the idea was interesting. Like, what if you maybe a way you could promote your voice acting skills is an idea you can have it. I still might play around with this idea, but you're better at it. It's like you could do like dramatic readings of like NES intros.
Oh my god!
You know what I mean?
Did you ever watch any of my retro roast videos?
I've seen a few, yeah. It's kind of a similar idea.
Yeah, wow. I was thinking about you today because, like, you are the man on TikTok. What are you going to do? Like, aren't they're taking it down, right?
I don't think they're going to take it down.
Yeah, because I think they said, like, November 1st or whatever.
Yeah, it's worth so much. Dude, the data and the people and the app is worth someone is going to snatch it up and work out a deal. It's just worth too much. It's just worth too much money. It's worth too much money.
Yeah, wow.
And if you're ByteDance, who who owns TikTok, and they have a bunch of other apps. If you like stick to your guns and get banned in the U.S., not only do you lose probably trillions of dollars from being banned in the U.S., other countries might follow suit. So your options are lose everything or sell to a U.S. company for something.
Yeah,
you know what I mean.
Gotcha.
So I just it could go down, but like at the end of the day, yeah, TikTok has grown really well. The Instagram algorithm is rough. Just is what it is. But,
Instagram is rough.
I'll just keep chipping away. It doesn't matter if there'll be another something if TikTok goes down. I have all the videos. I didn't delete anything. I have everything saved on a hard drive. I can reuse that content on a different platform.
You're good.
Yeah. I'm going to take a quick pee break, like 35 seconds, because I drank 4 beers already. I got to take a pee break. Okay. And people keep telling me to stream, but I don't like streaming because when I'm streaming, it's like, because what I do is I get drunk and I play games and I just talk mad shit, and most of it is not funny or great. And then I just find like the 1% that's kind of funny, edit it together, make a quick like 30-second, 2-minute video. On stream, it would just be terribly disappointing, and I've tried it, and it's like I feel weird knowing that even if one person is watching me. Gaming is my getaway. I don't want to be like spied on, observed while I game.
No, I think you've got like that's a good approach. Like you just take it's all killer, no filler. You know, I think that's a good approach.
Yeah, and then the funny stuff doesn't happen if I know people are watching, because I feel weird.
Yeah.
Anyway, we were talking about the LSD game, which for those of you listening, I'll edit out the pee break. Is just Google it. Just Google it if you're curious about that game. Yeah, it's so weird. You know, a game is also weird that I would love if you knew anything about, is that Mosquito game on PS2.
What, Mr. Mosquito?
Mr. Mosquito. What do you know about that game?
I've tried to get to the developer before. He hasn't responded to me, so I don't know much of anything about it, to be honest. That's the thing too. Like, if I think the game is cool and cult, I'll reach out to the developer first. Like if I don't know a lot, and then if they say yes, then I'll play through the game, and then I'll formulate questions. I mean, I'm lucky that I know a reasonable amount, so like most of the time I'm prepared before I even make the pitch. But like in the case of like something like Mr. Mosquito, I don't even remember playing the game that much when it was out. I just remembered it as so like Western, you know, like it was very like from that ilk of like Katamari Damacy,
yes,
and like Jumping Flash and like Intelligent Cube, just being so foreign, you know. So, but I know a lot of people really appreciate that game. So that's one of the reasons why I would have it if I could.
I've never played it. Later I read about it because it kind of grew on the internet as this really odd cult following, and so I started paying attention to it and watching videos. But you brought up 2 games, Jumping Flash and Intelligence Cube, that no one talks about, which is unfortunate. Jumping Flash blew my mind as a kid. I actually played that. Intelligence Cube.
Jumping Flash. Oh.
You play a robot rabbit saving alien little cute animals by jumping around and shooting lasers out of your rabbit ears or whatever. Yep. It's awesome.
It's such a good game. Like, I'm super happy that I have that in the minds behind the shooter games. I spoke to the North American producer, Perry Rogers, who's actually, once upon a time, was a member of that legendary United States video games team in the 80s. And he's just a great producer, worked on some great games over the years, and he remembers it as essentially like a really sexy tech demo. Like, they were kind of like, there's not a lot to this game because it's pretty short. Jumping Flash is pretty short, and they were like, people are going to dig this because of the sense of like scope, how high you could jump, how big the world felt, but they didn't think that it was going to be like a huge seller because the game ultimately is like pretty short. That's one of the reasons why they had the sequel and things like that, and a lot of people don't know, but there's actually a Jumping Flash 3 that only came out in Japan.
What? Motherfuck, I'm getting this shit. Jumping Flash 3? What?
Yeah, it's not named Jumping Flash 3. If you write in Jumping Flash 3, it'll probably come up, but that's not the name. But
okay, let me see if I can find it.
It's a small little Japanese development team that didn't work on many other games, and Jumping Flash's engine is actually taken from another game that they worked on, and they kind of reskinned it, and they added the whole Baron Aloha story to make it Jumping Flash. But that was just like a sign of the times back in the day, that they had this really cool engine, and they put a really cool, coat of paint on it. I'm pretty sure if you go on Guinness, it's the first ever 3D platform game, Jumping Flash.
Well, I just downloaded it. It's called Robot Mon Dieu.
Yep.
And there's going to be a video soon of this game because I didn't even know it existed. So credit to
funny.
you.
I didn't know it existed either until a good friend of mine, Jason Wiesner, who's actually one of the co-creators of Vector Man, told me about it.
Oh.
So I was like, holy shit, I had no idea. But Jason too is working on a book. He spoke to me for the minds behind the Genesis games, and he spoke to me about Apocalypse because he helped design Apocalypse on the PS1, the Bruce Willis game. And he's super intelligent. He's worked on so many great games. And I had done a post on Facebook about Jumper Flash, how much I loved it. And he was like, oh, you know there was a third one? And I was just like, no. And then I started watching the video, and I was just like, damn, I guess it gets me some Jumper Flash 3, baby. Oh.
I'm going to play that for sure.
So,
you brought up Vector Man. I want to ask you if you think, I think I might have brought this up on the last one, even if I did, who cares? I viewed Vector Man as a kid, because I was a Genesis kid, as like the answer to Donkey Kong Country for that like 3D rendering type graphic. Converted to sprites. Is that what they were going for? Is sort of to
absolutely
answer Donkey Kong?
Not even the answer to Donkey Kong, because you got to remember too, like right around this time, not only did they have Donkey Kong, but they had like Mario RPG, they had Chrono Trigger, like the Super Nintendo was just pumping out like first party monsters, you know? And it's just like Sonic 2 was a game changer, you know? But I mean, how many other mascot games can you have? Like the Sega just didn't have it. They didn't have other mascot games like that. And Vector Man just came along at like the perfect time. It was a really cool idea. And the team at Blue Sky, they I don't think they had success with their other games even like remotely close to Vector Man, because they did like Ariel's Little Mermaid on Genesis. They did Ren and Stimpy, which is really cool. I like Ren and Stimpy. They did Desert Demolition with Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner, which had some really cool graphical elements to it, but it wasn't like a huge seller. But for some reason or another, man, they hit pay dirt with Vector Man.
Yeah.
From the story, the music, the gameplay, I mean, it just hits on so many levels, and it's aged beautifully.
Still plays good. I played it recently.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That to me, that game gave the Sega Genesis like another year of life, you know? So yeah, it's a classic. It's still a classic to this day. I would love for them to bring back that series, but I think it would be so hard to get that team back together. There was so much drama at Blue Sky at the time, and that's the thing. In the Genesis book, I speak to a lot of that team on pretty much like 4 or 5 different Blue Sky games are in the Genesis book. And oh man, there's just so much drama. Like the shit that these people had to put up with to make games, like politically, socially, like I felt bad for them. Like they're great people. So Vector Man was never easy in development. Those guys put up with so much to make sure that game came out on time.
That's I mean, that might be the unsung story of almost every development studio of what. Dude, game development, for those who don't know, is like quality of life might be one of the worst jobs of all time.
Oh, yeah. It's like
terrible.
I was interviewing David Perry, who a lot of people know for like games like MDK, Aladdin. MDK and Aladdin are probably like the two big, Earthworm Jim. And during like pretty much the entire Aladdin cycle on the Genesis, he was sleeping in his car. And you say, oh yeah, he's sleeping in his car. The guy's 6'8". So
damn.
I mean, just imagine that like you're working so late that it makes no sense to go home, and you're just sleeping in your car, and then you're this like mammoth of a man, you know? So these guys put up with a lot of shit in order to make their art. And then that's the thing too, it's like whenever I go in a GameStop and I hear people talking about games, I jump in, and the first thing people say is like, oh, you don't know anything about video games. And then I have to like pull like do you know who I am? And they're like, no. So it's like, I'm nobody. Like I'm an author, I've interviewed a ton of developers, I've done some voice acting, but like, man, like an amazing, like our guys, Carmack, you know, Carmack could walk into a GameStop and start talking about Doom, and some like 18-year-old kid will be like, you don't know what you're talking about, you old boomer, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, no, bro, that's Carmack.
That actually reminds me of something you said on our first podcast that I've actually used this line a couple times, credit to you, is that it's not like if you see a movie, let's say you go and see Tenet, you know who Christopher Nolan is. You understand that, like that's the mind behind that game, or movie behind Inception or whatever. But somehow the way the video game industry, like there are breakouts. Like people know who Cliff Bleszinski is, they know who Hideo Kojima is. There's a few. But for the most part, we don't, like, even me as a gamer, we don't know. I don't, like, you brought up Toe Jam and Earl last time, which was one of my favorite games growing up. I would have, and then I got your book. I bought it, by the way. It's awesome. Everyone should go buy it. I should speak to the one fucking negative Amazon review that made my blood boil, and I messaged you about it. And the logic on that Amazon review was like, this motherfucker.
The person never read the book, and they're a hater.
Obviously.
Which means I do a really good job of pissing them off, and that just makes me so happy on so many levels. Like, whenever I read that review, I'm like, that person hates me so much.
They went out of their way.
And the thing is, too, so many people responded to that bad review.
He got eviscerated, dude. People were like, what? Because it's so obvious. Yeah.
And then it's just as worse, because, like, they're talking about how, like, they were talking about, I didn't know something about a game, and that game's not even in the book. It's like, it's just so funny.
It's just, you could tell it was
when you have
triggered.
haters, it's great. Yeah. I love it. I love it.
But I got the book, and so you guys check it out on Amazon. Just, there's one negative review. Don't care about the review. It's bullshit. And I got the first book, and I was reading about Toe Jam and Earl and the whole LSD thing, and it was like, as a huge fan, like, I have Toe Jam and Earl posters. I didn't know who these people were, right?
Yeah.
And there's just something, and I was kind of thinking about that. I'm like, I should know, actually, because if that's what one of my biggest hobbies are, the thing that I geek out about, I know more UFC fighters than I know gamers, but I'm probably a little bit more game developers, but I would say I'm into video game history and shit more than I am to UFC. They're pretty close, but I can name you hundreds of UFC fighters. And so that's kind of a weird thing. Like, there's something about the video game world. Maybe it's like the branding and owners and publishing, right? They want to put the focus on the franchise. I get all that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's probably what it is.
Yeah, it's just they've been conditioned to be that way for such a long time. I mean, that's the reason why Activision exists. Activision started off as a splinter company with a bunch of disgruntled Atari employees that wanted to get their names on their carts, and they left Atari to start Activision, you know? So, and Sega, I mean, still to this day, people know who Phoenix Ree is. She's, like, you know, one of the greatest female developers of all time. Like, we're talking Phantasy Star, Altered Beast. But if you say Riko Kodama, they're like, who? And it's like, that's the name that Riko Kodama used in instruction manuals, Phoenix Ree. And she wasn't allowed really to use her real name because Sega didn't want her to get poached because she was such a talent, you know? But all of these guys all used phony names. I mean, still to this day, like, there are games as late as like 1999, 2000, 2001 where you can't find the people that worked on these games. That they don't have LinkedIn pages, they don't have Facebook pages. It's just like,
that makes your job
it's
harder.
Scary. It makes my job super hard, you know? But sometimes I find them, sometimes I don't. But I mean, that's my goal at the end of the day, to tell as many stories as possible. So
I was listening to a podcast called Retronauts. I'm sure you're familiar with them. I guess they're really big. They were talking about, I was listening to the Samurai Showdown episode, because that was a fighting game that I thought was always really cool and wasn't as big as I thought it should be. And they ended up, like, side railing into some Konami stuff because one of the musicians had whatever. But I guess Konami didn't even start, like, listing the composers for music until, like, way later. It was just written by Konami, and you couldn't even have your name in the credits.
Yeah, because they were trying to be protective. You know, they were trying to just make sure that they could continue their business. You know, because I mean, that's how competitive it is. Like, there's so many stories. There's a couple of these stories in the Minds Behind the Sports games where it's like, what is it? Mutant League Hockey. They got their producer because what happened was the guy from EA knew that this young producer was really good and he was working at Accolade and he was thinking about leaving. So the guy from EA took him out to a baseball game, bought him a couple of hot dogs, and next thing you know, the guy is off and working for EA. So it's like they knew that if they could get some of these disgruntled employees from other developers and give them a little bit more money and wine and dine them a little bit, that they could bring them over. You know, it's kind of like in wrestling, like the Monday Night Wars. You know, one guy is unhappy on WWE, leaves, goes to WCW, and becomes a superstar, you know, or the other way around. So that was definitely the case. And like some of these companies are like up the block from each other, around the corner. Like in the second book, the minds behind the adventure games. DMG and Vis Softworks, those companies, they shared the same food truck. So they would come down to eat lunch and they would be eating at the food truck and they would be talking about the games that they were working on. So that's how like a lot of these companies have like cross references, like some worked on State of Emergency, some worked on Grand Theft Auto and things like that. They all knew what each other was working on, and sometimes they ended up leaving one company for the other. And the heads of those companies were absolutely not happy with that, but you couldn't do anything when, you know, you've got like a technology district and things like that. But like in Silicon Valley, I mean, that was going to happen all the time. Japan, different story. They wanted to protect as much as they possibly could.
Speaking of, you brought up wrestling. I don't think we were recording when we talked about wrestling at the very beginning, and how that's kind of sports, right? Would that be considered a sports, or is wrestling its own?
Oh, I think so.
You think so?
Yeah, absolutely. There's 4 wrestling games in the minds behind the sports games, because like even though it's sports entertainment, you know, it is somewhat based on a real sport.
It's athletic, absolutely. For sure.
Cade, I have Rockstar Presents Ping Pong in the minds behind the sports games, and to me, that is probably one of the best sports games of all time. So yeah, I think wrestling games definitely belong in the sports category, and especially considering the fact that they come out every year. I have Tony Hawk 3 in the sports book. I have Destruction Derby on PlayStation. I was going to ask about
racing, and you can't believe you brought up Destruction Derby. No one talks about that game.
It's such a great game, and like this is the thing too. I love that chapter in the sports game because of the time and energy that went into that game. Like these guys produced beautiful polygonal graphics for that game. They were the first
ones to do car damage, like real car damage, and it was mind-blowing.
Yep. It was beautiful, and the designer on that game, Martin Edmondson, he's a genius. He is a genius. Like, I think he's like one of the smartest developers I've ever met in my entire life. And the thing is, too, is he's also the guy that created Driver.
I was going to say
Driver.
Yep, Driver did it too.
Such a good game. And Driver is actually going to be featured in the minds behind the PlayStation game. So
that's a big one. Yeah, people know Driver. Yeah. It's bigger than Destruction Derby, I think. Yeah. Like as far as
the thing that sucks is like, Driver has a good legacy, but like the last Driver game was like the one that was based in like San Francisco for the PS3.
Yeah,
it did, but it was such a good game. It just didn't. They didn't promote it properly. You know, like if it would have got promoted a little better.
The another thing that Driver did. So Destruction Derby, I wouldn't say real time collisions because it was like they were like destruction states. It wasn't real time the way they would define real time now, but it was real time back then. It was like it felt like dynamic collision and like based on where you got hit, the car would crumple. That was mind blowing. And then Driver came out, did the same thing, but it's the first game I remember that had like the photo video editor director mode where you could move the camera around and you could save your clips, and that like holy shit to me that was
well, see, the thing is like the designer of the game, like I said, Martin Edmondson, he loved that level of like customization. So like he was trying to get a track editor in the first Destruction Derby. I mean, the first Destruction Derby was an amazing game, but imagine if it had a track editor. Oh my god,
holy shit,
I would have never stopped playing, you know. And the way they accomplished like the damage was these guys actually went to like Destruction Derby races and they took thousands upon thousands of high resolution photos. That's how they got that done. That's like old school rotoscoping, you know, animation mixed in with like new age polygonal like 3D technology. Those guys were like doing cutting edge visual work at the time, and they don't get nearly as much credit as they deserve. So
yeah, Destruction Derby was the shit. I was gonna I didn't know they were connected, but I was gonna say, did you play Driver? Because that's the next game I thought about, which makes sense.
Yeah, it's the same guy. It's the same creator. Martin Lee Edmondson, amazing man. Super happy to have met him.
Dang. That's crazy. So yeah, racing games would be considered sports games too. Did you ever play So I got into a few wrestling games. The first one was early PS1. I got it close to launch. I think this was a launch title, WWF WrestleMania. It was like Mortal Kombat style digitized 2D graphics, but for PS1.
So that's actually that's in the first book. That's WrestleMania, the arcade game. I actually interviewed the creator of that game, Mark
it's a port? The PS1 version is a port? I didn't know that.
The PS1
That's why I didn't recognize it.
Of the arcade game, yeah. So that's a really fun, wacky, off-the-wall wrestling game.
Super off-the-wall. I always played The Undertaker. That was like my dude. And then there was like I'm sure there was multiple ones on the 64, but one of them on the 64 had a character creator.
Yes, there's a few of them that have character creators, but WWF WrestleMania 2000 had a character creator, and WWF No Mercy had a character creator. And I actually spoke to the producer of those games, Sanders Keel, for the book, and he wrote the afterword for the book. So if you like wrestling games, there's definitely something in there for you. There's 4 wrestling games featured, a couple from Acclaim and a couple from THQ, so it totally captures like the 90s, early 2000s wrestling games, which are the best wrestling games that have ever been created. So if that's like your fix, you can definitely scratch at it in the book.
Nice. Racing games. Do you have any racing games in the sports game books coming up?
So the only racing game that's in the book is Destruction Derby, and the reason why that is because like Destruction Derby like is an actual sport. Like I wanted to try and get a NASCAR game, but it's kind of like every developer that I speak to, like the NASCAR games were never like a lot of fun to develop, and it's just like NASCAR is fun like if you're the driver. I'm not really into NASCAR. Like it's just like racing like over and over again, like like in a circle and shit. And I know I'm gonna get a lot of flack for that. I apologize, but like I tried.
I highly doubt a lot of NASCAR fans are listening to this, so I think you're fine.
Yeah, but I mean, I tried to get a couple of NASCAR developers, and I didn't receive answers. I tried, I definitely did, but and I was gonna get a Need for Speed, but then I'm like, those are kind of like adventure racing games. Like they have like Fast and the Furious kind of like storylines to it, and it's not the same. I would have loved to have gotten like Ridge Racer or Rage Racer, but the Japanese developers are super hard to get.
Yeah.
So the only racing game that I could really get was Destruction Derby, so I was happy that I at least got that.
Maybe you could find like a number one, like a sidekick that's Japanese or speaks Japanese, and could maybe approach, because as for an American audience, doing what you do, but then getting Japanese, because I mean, let's be real. At least when I was growing up, we just considered the Japanese far superior at making games.
Oh yeah,
like during the PS,
yeah,
maybe 16-bit era, I felt like 50-50, but I definitely felt after that for a while like anything from Japan was better.
See, and that's the thing though too, because the video game industry effectively started in the United States. Like Atari is an American company, and the Japanese came along a little bit later. But there are so many great American and Canadian and European developers out there. Like England has an amazing history of video game development. The UK, Ireland, Australia too. Like, I mean, I know that's not the UK, but it's technically kind of like the UK when you think about it. But like,
I mean,
Australia
it's their trash dump.
Yeah, but like you're crazy.
I lived in Australia for a while. I get it.
Did you like it?
I loved it. I would.
Wow.
In fact, I was like, I'd always tell my wife, like, if we ever get game over rich, like somehow crazy money, I would go to Australia, because it's this giant ass continent. There's no people. There's only like 6 big cities. I lived in Melbourne, which is like on the southeast corner, sort of Australia.
Yeah.
And I loved everything about it. But right now, they're in like full martial lockdown. Like people are getting arrested.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm like, ooh, maybe I'm glad I didn't go back to Australia.
I just shipped like 4 books there, and I keep asking the people if they got them yet. And they're like, yeah, we're probably not going to get them for like another month. And I'm like, oh, that sucks. I feel terrible. Because like I'm in like 5 or 6 colleges in Australia. So like I love that place. Like they've got a lot of love for me. So it just sucks that it takes so long.
It's this giant continent. I mean, most of it's desert, but there's like 25 million people total. Wow. It's like LA. It's like just way less people, but you have all of like it's a first world country. When I was there, it was just plants and animals were different. You drove on a different side of the road, but for the most part, it was the same as here. Nice restaurants, movie theaters, but just less people. It was awesome. Everyone's
which is
chill.
Great.
Yeah. You live in New York,
I live
which
in New
is
York
like
City,
the opposite.
Oh my God.
I don't know how you do it, man.
Man, COVID was so bad. It's still bad, but like, I mean, like March and April, it was just like, because going grocery shopping in Brooklyn is bad by itself. And then when you've got everyone scrambling and fighting and stuff, it was just terrible. And it was just like, my wife was pregnant, so like she didn't leave the house, and I have I had a 2-year-old, she's 3 now, year old daughter, and it's just like they wouldn't leave the house, and I had to go out every day for groceries and stuff like that. And then like I was selling books like crazy. So I had to go to the post office, and it was just like, man, so it was like Resident Evil outside. It was crazy.
That's interesting.
Like literally like Resident Evil.
That's interesting that your business, because my business, I do online marketing stuff. COVID skyrocketed my business too. Yeah. It was crazy.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. Yeah. And I'm sure video game sales how could they not have skyrocketed?
I was talking to a publicist the other day, and she was telling me how, you know, she represents all these movie stars and how they don't have work and stuff. And I was like, you should shift into gaming, you know? And she had no interest. And I was just like, man, video game industry has not stopped. Has not stopped at all. It's like, I'll remember COVID like 20 years from now because I watched like every Marvel movie that I missed out on. but I'll remember it more because like I was playing Animal Crossing like 4 or 5 hours a day because it came out like March 20th, right before like everything shut down. You know, so that's the thing too. Like I try and explain to people, like you play video games and you remember like the things that were going on in your life when you were playing the game. It's like so many people love Final Fantasy VII, not because it was such a great game, even though it was, but they remember it because they were like at this moment in their lives where like everything smelled better, everything tasted better, 100%. Everything looked better. You're 17, 18 years old, and it's just like you romanticized it. You know, so it's like if you can keep that memory and then compound it with like the developer's memory, then you have something that's like truly special. Like that's kind of the reason why I do this. It's like providing the cheese to the wine of the memory of the game that you played, you know?
Yeah. I had these guys on from a website called Stone Age Gamer, and there's the Stone Age Gamer podcast.
I love those guys. You got Chris and Dan on?
Chris and Dan. I think his name was super badass. And Dan has a separate podcast that he gave up on, but they still have the episodes hosted. I've been listening to it, which is Pairing Beer with Video Games.
Yeah.
It's dope. It's kind of
Dan's awesome.
Yeah. They were
Dan's
like
a Mafia member.
Yeah, he was hilarious. I did his highlight. He had this whole rant about being in love with his next door neighbor that had robbed the robot on the Mega or whatever, the NES or Famicom. He wanted to marry her because she was cute and she was in the game. He's hilarious. And he has the East Coast kind of like, just going off saying, hey, this fucking guy, like all the time.
Yeah, he's great.
And then Chris is super articulate. I'm super glad they hopped on the podcast. I don't even know how I found them, but the people I've talked to
through me because he designed the logo for the Retro Game Mafia, and then I invited him, and you guys all started talking. That's how you met him.
Is that how I found him, dude? My memory, dude. I smoked too much weed.
That's credit right. to you. I don't. So I remember everything. I'm like a turtle. You know, I remember everything. So
anyway, yeah, the idea of like pairing the cheese with the wine or the beer, like that. I think that is awesome. Gaming is this weird. I want to ask you a question. I mean, we both play a lot of games. Obviously, I'm posting videos. You're always like posting videos on your RG 3B50, whatever it is, 350 research.
I love that thing. It's great.
We're playing games, but we were talking about nostalgia, that magic time, like say Final Fantasy VII. It's less. The game was great, but for so many people, it hits during this time when like. Things taste like it's this between 11 and 18, maybe. You have this period where the music, the movies, and the video games are going to hit you at a level that's not going to happen the same way when you're older, and it's going to shape who you are.
I completely agree. It's just like there's been a couple of times, like in my 20s and 30s, that like I've played a game and just been wowed and just said like. Something special is going on here.
Yes.
You know, like the first time I played The Last of Us.
That's one I was going to bring up. Yep.
Metroid Prime, Halo 3, Fallout 3, you know. But you get jaded when you get older, you know. You want things to feel a certain way, and then they don't. Or you're just disgruntled, or you settle. You know, and I just feel like, 11 to 18, or maybe even like now, because like people are so much more immature. I would say like 11 to like 25. You're just at this moment. You're at this moment in your life where you just like look at things a little bit differently.
Yeah.
You know.
I just feel I was going to ask, like, it kind of seems like I'm chasing that a little bit, and it's never going to quite be the same.
Are.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we all are. It's like still, I'm like right now I'm on Instagram talking to you, and like we were talking about Final Fantasy VII, and I just for some reason decided to look up Red 13, and I just posted a picture of him, and I said my spirit animal, because it was just like, man, when I was a kid, oh, I love that character. He was just so badass, you know, and he wasn't the best character in the game by far, but I couldn't force myself to take him out of my team just because I just loved him.
Yep.
You know, and the cutscenes of him were just beautiful, you know. So
he was so wise. That's what I liked about him. He's so wise.
It reminded me of a lot of Lion King too, you know, and I was a big Lion King guy when I was a kid. So it was just like having him. But see, that's the thing. So it's like one day I am going to get somebody from Final Fantasy VII. I am going to do an interview with somebody. I'm going to find somebody. And I know that I can, because I never thought that I would get the level designer of Parasite Eve. And I got him. So it's like, if I could get him, if I can crack in and get somebody at Squaresoft for that game, I can get somebody from Final Fantasy VII. So like, it's going to happen, and I'm going to have the appreciation that I have for Parasite Eve now, because I'll tell you that story another time, because that book's not out yet and I don't want to give it away. But like, I have such a greater appreciation for the team that worked on Parasite Eve and the final project, the final product that is that game, now that I've spoken to that man, Charles Pinady. Amazing man, super nice. Like, I was writing that chapter as my wife was in labor with my second kid. I'm sitting in the waiting room. They won't let me go in because of COVID and stuff like that. And I'm just sitting on my phone banging out the chapter. But like one day there'll be like a Minds Behind the RPGs or whatever.
Woo!
And we'll get a Final Fantasy VII
Sign
in there.
me up.
One day. And that's the thing I want to say too, like, by next year, we'll probably have like 6 books out. And I can't promise what's going to happen next, because I mean, I've pounded out like 6 books in 3.5 years. That's a lot. We're talking like 700,000 words, you know, in addition to, I write for Old School Gamer. I run my own entertainment website and reviewfix.com. I do writing on games, so it's just like I've done a ton of work in the last 3 years. So it's like after the 6th book, I can't promise what's next, but like the series definitely isn't going to end. But I'm gonna like think long and hard after that, like what's going to be next, and it's going to be balls to the wall. That's all I'm going to say after that.
Man, if you do a JRPG book, I will promote that shit. People will unfollow me because they're so sick of me promoting that shit.
I'm gonna try, you know, and it's funny though too, because there's a great book out. I always forget how to say the guy's last name. It's John Skraspinek or something like that. It's like SZ, you know, PNIAK or whatever, like a really crazy last name. But he's a super nice guy, and he does this book, and it's all like Q&As with Japanese game developers, but like most of them, like he takes archived interviews that are from like dead magazines and stuff like that, and he compiles them into this big ass book, and he just talks about how it's like impossible to get Japanese developers, and like the only way that he could put the book together was to like find all of these old gaming journalists and like bribe them to like use their interviews in his book. Yes. You know, and it's self-published and stuff, but it's like a really cool piece of equipment. And like I remember there's one interview in there where he was just complaining about how hard it is to get Japanese developers. So that was the thing, when Sega agreed to give me Riko Kodama for the Genesis book, I was like over the moon. 1, for Sega to agree, and then 2, to get like the first lady of video game development in there. So
can you give me 1 second? My wife's telling me there's like some sort of
that's okay
legit reason. 1 second. I'm going to ask you one more question. I'm going to wrap up, because I guess I guess my brother's dog is lost. He wants me to go help him find it.
No problem.
We're at like we're pretty long running time anyway. I wanted to ask you one question. We'll have you back on. So sometimes when you get a developer, you mentioned earlier in the podcast, I've been waiting to ask this question. You get a developer, and maybe you're not super familiar with the game, but if you get contact, you'll go and then play the game to kind of prep. Mm-hmm. What game had you not played, then you got a hold of the developer, then you ended up going back and playing because of the book series and was like, this game is fucking awesome. I can't believe I missed it. I can't believe I never played it. Like the best game you weren't aware of, but because of the books, you ended up playing and you loved the game.
So Cyber Bowl, I was aware of it because everyone talks about how Cyber Bowl was the influence for Madden. Like the behind the back camera view wasn't a camera view that football games employed back then. Like football games always used a side view, like Tecmo Bowl, you know? So I had played Cyber Bowl on the Genesis before, and I wasn't that impressed with it. And I just kind of like, you know, whatever. Yeah, it influenced Madden, blah, 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 blah. And then Don Traeger, who was a producer at EA, he's one of the founding fathers of EA Sports. He's like, you got to talk to the Cyber Bowl guys. And I was like, okay. So before I pitched John Salwitz, who actually created Rampart and Paperboy as well. I mean, he's one of the greatest video game developers of the 80s. I started doing research on the original version, the arcade version, and the arcade cabinet for Cyber Bowl is so sexy. It's a double monitor setup. You can play 4 players football at the same time. And it's like the way the cabinet is set up, like the teams playing against each other, really, they can't see each other. It's beautiful.
That is sexy as hell.
It was so completely ahead of its time. It's like one of the best multiplayer arcade experiences ever, to the point where like pretty much every developer that I speak to that worked at a development company in the late 80s and early 90s, they all had Cyber Bowl machines in their office. Like everybody was playing Cyber Bowl. So being able to like discover Cyber Bowl the way that I did through the interview and then by watching video and seeing like the actual machine and being able to like play the machine and things like that, I mean, that was probably one of my favorite moments of the entire research process of the Minds Behind Sports games.
Badass. Great way to wrap it up. Give everyone a spiel on where they can find you, buy the books, all that stuff.
Sure. So the book is available wherever fine books are sold: Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Indigo, Books A Million. But the best place to buy the book is patrickhickeyjr.com/books. If you do it there, then I will ship the book out to you personally. I will sign your copy.
Yep.
Depending on where you're from, I will slip goodies in your book, like baseball cards, stickers, the whole 9 yards. I just had a guy who was actually one of the lead writers on the Leisure Suit Larry series, like one of the coolest video game series of all time, buy the book, and he's from Seattle, so he got some Seattle Mariners baseball cards in there, and he posted a really cool picture on his LinkedIn. So that's the thing. Order directly from me. You'll get a cooler experience. We'll connect. That's the thing too. I'm on Instagram at Patrick Hickey Jr. I love talking to people, connecting to people about video games. A lot of the people's stories that are told to me, I listen, and that's how some of the games get in the book. Like games like Star Fox, Croc, Zill, those games wouldn't have gotten in the books unless people really like pitched me hard on them and like, oh, if you do a shooter book, you gotta get Star Fox. If you do an adventure game, you gotta get Croc, blah, 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 blah. So buy the books, interact with me, and you never know, like one of your favorite games could get featured and get put in one of these books.
Sweet, man. I appreciate the time as always. You are you're like, what's that isn't there like a Greek or Roman god that has like the power of speaking, like the spews like persuasion? Maybe it's
that's awesome.
You're fucking good at talking. Do a podcast, goddammit.
It's funny because somebody that I work with, that's what they call me. That's their nickname for me. They call me Prometheus. I was like, oh
that's
my God.
What it is.
Okay.
Yes. See,
and
I'm not
like,
the only
right,
one.
okay.
I'm not the only one.
Yeah. Like she's like my big sister. I know her for like 15 years, and she's just like, yeah. She's like, in my phone, you're Prometheus. I'm like, oh, okay, all right, cool.
Check him out online. I'll put all the applicable links in the podcast. Also, check out the hashtag or the account Retro Game Mafia. He handles that. That's where I met Stone Age Gamer. Thanks for the reminder on that one. There's a bunch of cool gaming accounts, collectors, people that are part of that. If you search that hashtag, you'll find a grundle of cool gaming content, and we'll have him back on again. Thank you again, man. On again. Thank you again, man. On again. Thank you again, man. On again. Thank you again, man.